Do you think anyone will notice them?
Not
No one picks up on this.
No. It's busy looking up here.
Yeah.
It's the Bulletin, Australian Union's weekly look at what's happening. Francis Leach with you.
And Kleo Cruse.
Coming up today, we're talking teaching. Teaching in Tasmania, in particular, Kleo, where things have been pretty tough and teachers have had enough.
Yeah, so we're speaking to an amazing teacher today called Duncan, who's going to, I guess, talk us through what it's like to be a teacher in this post-pandemic world, but in particular to be a teacher in the state school system in Tasmania.
So we look forward to doing that. But first I want to talk to you. How are you? You missed last week's ep because a bit of a health crisis in the family?
Yeah, so my little daughter Lenny, who I find an excuse to talk about every episode.
Hi, Lenny.
Hey! She'll see this one day and be like, ugh. Ended up in hospital with some respiratory issues. She was treated amazingly. The doctors were amazing. The nurses were amazing. I did talk to them a lot about what it was like to be, a healthcare worker over the last few years, how burnt out they feel, which kind of brings us to how it's Mental Health Week this week.
It is. And Mental Health Week is not just something that is about when you're at home. Mental Health Week also focuses a lot on mental health in the workplace, and it's such an important component of our working lives, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think if the pandemic did one thing, it was make us really look inside and realise, like, oh my God, like being sick, in a mental health sense can feel just as, detrimental to oneself as being physically ill. And I think we need to realise that more. Yeah,
unions have been talking about this for a while now, and we've been talking about the importance of, making sure that mental health is, as you said, there are risks associated with the work you do physically, but it's also an environment where risks are associated with your mental well-being, and those things need to be as big a priority in the workplace as, whether you're going to climb a ladder without someone holding it, for instance, which you shouldn't do.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that.
As well.
That was not a suggestion, okay? Don't be doing that. But in all seriousness, that's what Mental Health Week is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Check in with your colleagues, check in with yourself. And if you're not feeling well, take a day off if you can.
Listen to her.
We're actually very fortunate in that we are getting a state school teacher to somehow put aside some time to chat to us today. We've got Duncan, who is an AEU rep and a primary school teacher down in Tasmania. Hello, Lauren, how are you?
Hello, nice to see you guys.
So Lauren, you're an AEU rep and you're a state school teacher down in Tasmania. What's it been like to be a teacher over the last few years?
I mean, myself and all of my friends that are teachers have been working so hard, and I don't think I've got much left in me anymore. It's been hectic, really hectic.
It's a distressing thing to hear because obviously you're very dedicated, like all of your colleagues, to teaching young people, and to feel like you're at your wit's end must be really difficult. And I know you're campaigning at the moment to improve a lot of Tasmanian teachers, particularly relative to how teachers who are also doing it tough on the mainland, but you guys are even in a bigger hole than them, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been non-stop. Our work levels have increased, the workload has increased. The support we're getting in classrooms, it feels like it's decreased. I mean, it's in some classrooms and some schools absolutely non-existent, and there's more need with the same amount or less support. So less psychologists, social workers, speech pathologists, teacher assistants. Like, it just feels so much harder than it did, 3, even 5 years ago.
Are your students still feeling that kind of, feeling a bit rocked from the pandemic and the big changes that they went through?
I think there's definitely a turn now. COVID isn't as much of a concern. We've gone through mask wearing, we've gone through constantly rat testing, constant vigilance around that. But what I'm seeing in my community now is it's the cost of living is coming into play. So I'm in a school where we already had issues with kids not necessarily having as much food as more well-off communities, and our communities are struggling. Our teachers are struggling, and everything is so much more expensive. So we're seeing, I suppose, our new pandemic in cost of living and those rises, which the kids are now, they're associating that with food and warmth and new things and toys, and that's coming through at school now more so than the pandemic.
That must have a huge impact on their well-being and their ability to study and to learn. If you're learning hungry, you're not learning very much at all. And the emotional toll on them, their families, and also teachers as well, who already have, as you pointed out, Lauren, a huge workload, a huge emotional workload to get these kids the best education you can deliver to them. But also on teachers. I mean, I'm wondering just how many of your colleagues have sort of walked away from the profession in recent times because the pay and the conditions don't stack up to the demands of the job.
Yeah, look, I know people and I have colleagues that have stepped away, taken some leave without pay, or have moved to the private sector where the pay represents a bit more our worth and what we're doing. But again, we're doing roles of the psychologist and the social worker and the counsellor. We're making sure before we teach our kids, we've got to make sure that they are fed, that they feel safe and secure and loved. We are making sure that they are in clean clothes and that they have had a good night's sleep and that they're not in immediate danger to return home to school. And only then can we start teaching them.
Mm.
And that's an expectation it's well above what the teaching degree and the education degree is.
So that we don't finish it on too upsetting a note, tell us about a highlight, something positive that came out of the recent industrial action.
A highlight for me is going to school the next day or that same day and having parents or kids say, hey, you're wearing red. There were I've seen heaps of people on social media or on the news, on the radio, hey, we support you and we care about what you're doing. That it's really empowering to have your students and the parents of your students say, look, we support you. And I think at the end of the day that it makes us feel like we're not asking too much.
Lauren, Duncan, we wish you all the best, and all your Tasmanian teaching colleagues and all the teachers around Australia who are fighting for a better deal for both teachers, but also, just as importantly, for their students and families. And we thank you for being on the Bulletin today.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Emergency.
My name's Kleo and I'm here for the first Kleo's Rant. And today we're going to be ranting about stage 3 tax cuts. Because why? Because they're trying to abolish the highest tax bracket. And guess what that means? That means that high earners pay the same proportion of tax as low income earners. How do we feel about that? And I don't know anyone that would be upset about this one because I frankly don't know that many Musquillionaires, okay? It's Mental Health Week. And you know what I reckon they should be using that money for? Mental health services. So come on, Mr. Albanese, get with the program. We don't want a situation like what's happening in Britain right now, where everyone's jumping down Truss's throat. Let's make this a fair and equitable country like the egalitarian nation that we know that we should be.
Oh. Wow, okay. You feeling better?
I'm feeling so much better. That was very cathartic for me.
It was.
Yeah.
And memorable too. Thank you for being with us on the Bulletin this week. Eventful program that it was. And we'll be back again very soon. But remind people what they need to do now they've come this far with us.
Can you please like, share, subscribe.
And join.
And join your union.
AustralianUnions.org.au for a better deal at work. Join your union, be active in your union, and we'll see you next week.
Next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.